It's 6:04, and I call the Independence Township Planning Commission meeting to order, and at this time ask everyone to stand and face the flag for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And at this time, I'd ask our Planning Commission Secretary to conduct the roll call.
Mr. Galley.
Here.
Mr. Lochran, absent. Mr. Mazza.
Here.
Mr. Patel.
Here.
Mr. Ritchie.
Here.
Chairman Savadan.
Here.
Ms. Tully here.
We have a quorum. We're missing one member, but we can conduct business with 6 members. We have before us an agenda. Does anyone want to make a motion to advance this and approve this agenda as printed?
I'll make a motion that we accept tonight's agenda as posted.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Agenda's approved 6-0. So the way we're going to conduct this meeting, because many of you are here for the master plan open space panel discussion, is following item G1, election of officers. The Planning Commission is going to vacate the dais. We're going to go into the audience, and the panel is going to come up here and sit at the dais. And then once we're finished item G2, the panel is going to leave the dais, and we're going to come back up to the dais to finish up the meeting and adjourn the meeting. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So the next item on the agenda is item E, public comment for items that are not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to comment for an item that is not on tonight's agenda? Please go to the podium, sign in, and introduce yourself, and welcome.
My name is Kelly Bills, and I live at 4890 East Princeton Avenue. My husband and I were both raised here and bought our own home here 13 years ago to raise our 3 children. We own Marketplace Pet Supplies here in Clarkston and love our community. We have had no issues living here until recently. We received an ordinance violation for our 5 chickens. I had a variance request meeting last week, and 4 out of 5 board members voted in agreement with proposing a change to the ordinance. I would like to propose a change to Ordinance 511, Maintenance of Animals. Class 3 animals shall not be permitted on premises less than 3 acres, and 1 additional Class 3 animal shall not be permitted per each 1/10 acre in excess of 3 acres. Class 3 animals are defined as rabbits, animals considered as poultry, and other animals weighing less than 75 pounds. I am proposing this ordinance be changed to permit Class 3 animals on 1 acre premises. I've collected over 100 signatures in less than a week from Independence Township residents in support of this change. Thank you for your time and consideration.
While you're up there, would you mind if there's any questions? Would you
Yeah, no
mind?
problem.
Does anyone have any questions?
I'll just make a quick comment on the ZBA. She did appear last week. We did have a similar case to this last year as well. You did make a slight misspeak. We, on the ZBA, we can't vote to support a change. We voted to postpone
Okay.
to a certain date, to a date uncertain. But the ZBA kind of was all in agreement that it seemed that an R1A parcel of 1 acre, if somebody can have 3 or 4 dogs, why can't they have 3 or 4 chickens as long as they meet the setback requirements with the coop? There's no noise, there's no unsightly violations, nothing else that violates any other ordinance in the township's ordinance. So that was kind of the basic discussion at the ZBA.
Yeah.
And I told them that we would bring it to the planning commission for discussion.
What are your thoughts on roosters?
I have a rooster.
What's it like? Is it a loud rooster?
Well, I mean, we keep him in the dark until about 8:30, and then he'll crow off and on. But I mean, it's just once every so often. It's not all day long. It's, as long as he's in the dark, it's not first thing in the morning at sunlight. So
Yeah.
we've got dogs that probably make more noise than a rooster.
Have you done any research of other communities in the area, how they regulate these types of animals?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've looked. A lot of them are pretty similar within the 1 acre, 1.5 acre, and they have setbacks to where your coop should be located. And
Yeah, that's my general understanding. I know a little bit about what you're talking about, and it does seem quite restrictive. 3 acres is
that's a lot for
It's a
one
lot.
chicken.
that's a lot. Yeah, I would agree. So,
And I will say with the rooster too, that my neighbors have all signed saying it's okay, and they're okay. We're not disturbing them with my rosy rooster. So
Mr. Rotman, this to me, based on the information that's been presented, this seems like a reasonable request, at least for us to look at. How would we go about initiating a text amendment?
Well, I'll have to discuss this with the township supervisor, again, and, then we'll just have to, proceed. We've got a number of ordinance amendments coming next month, so, to the planning commission, so we can just add it to the list.
Yeah, it seems to me that this issue it's quite trendy right now. I think there's a nationwide trend to backyard chickens. I don't agree with, I think roosters is not necessarily a good idea. I don't think all residents would be as responsible of you as you are with putting keeping a rooster in the dark till 8 o'clock in the morning. But I would certainly be open to considering chickens. But we can talk about
Right.
it. Happy to talk about it.
One question.
Yeah.
Was it 3 acres, 3 animals, 3 class?
no, 3 acres for one chicken, and then
Under 75 pounds?
that was it. Just said not specifically classified is what it says for class 3 animals.
Poultry.
What- no, I was
Poultry,
wondering about-
basically.
Yeah, I
Okay.
was just going off
Goats,
the.
like, goats would be included then?
No,
They're probably a different class
goats
animal.
are class one,
Okay.
class one.
We
Class
have
two.
3 classes of, different classes of animals, and those regulations haven't been really visited for quite a number of years.
Yeah, I think it's worthy of discussion. I think it's a fair request, in my opinion, but I appreciate the process that you proposed, speaking with the supervisor and then taking it from there. Do you have any other questions for us or any other comments?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, well, I appreciate you taking the time to present your concerns, and it sounds like we're going to consider it, so thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Judy, did you get her name and everything? So
Yeah,
you're all set?
Kelly Bills,
How's
yes.
Okay. That's all right.
Would anyone else like to go to the podium and speak on an item that's not on tonight's agenda? Don't all rush up there at once. Okay, it sounds like we're good, so I'm gonna,
Online?
anyone online? Last call? Okay. Next item is item F, public hearings. There are no public hearings. Item G, G1. So item G is regular business. G1 is election of officers. Election of officers is required by I believe the zoning, the planning enabling legislation as well as planning
Bylaws,
commission
yeah.
bylaws. So it's required that we do this annually in January of every year. And like I do in January of every year for the last few years, is I remind the planning commission that I certainly do not have to chair this planning commission. Anyone who's interested in being the chair in 2023, certainly please go for it. I would say that this is potentially a little bit more challenging year than other years because we're in the midst of a master plan, which has some potentially has some challenges. We also have a relatively new relatively inexperienced township board. So if I'm nominated, I would be happy to continue as chair in 2023, but that's not a campaign speech. Again, I'm happy to pass the torch to anyone who's interested in being chair. So, is there anyone who wants to make a nomination for chair?
I recommend appointment of Mr. Savadan for chair.
Okay, thank you for the nomination. Is there anyone else who wishes to nominate a different planning commission member for chair?
You need a support for that, right?
Okay.
I'll support. I think you do a fantastic job, and I'll support Ms. Tully's
Thank you.
nomination.
Last call to nominate someone else? Okay, so I guess we'll do a, not a roll call vote, but a
Voice vote.
voice vote. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word voice. A voice vote for that. It's on the record. Could you do the,
We're not doing a roll call, or we are?
that's what I meant, like, yeah.
Oh,
Roll
okay.
call, voice vote, yeah.
All right. Mr. Galley,
Yes.
Kinda.
Mr. Lockran absent, Mr. Mazza,
Yes.
Mr. Patel.
Yes.
Mr. Ritchie,
Yes.
Ms. Tully, yes.
You didn't ask me.
Oh. Can you vote for yourself?
I think you can.
Mr. Savadan,
Yes, yes.
Really worth it.
So next up is
congratulations.
thank you, and thank you for your support, I do appreciate it. And next up is our nominations for vice chair. I'm gonna nominate Brian Galley. He covered for me at a couple meetings last year, and by all accounts, did an outstanding job, so I nominate Brian Galley, and I'm looking for a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for Brian Galley as vice chair. Does anyone have any other nominees they'd like to move forward? Hearing no one, then, I would like to conduct a roll call vote for vice chair for Brian Galley.
Mr. Galley,
Yes.
Mr. Lockran absent, Mr. Mazza,
Yes.
Mr. Patel,
Yes.
Chairman Savadan.
Yes.
Ms. Tully, yes.
So we have a chair and a vice chair, and now we need a treasurer. I would,
Gonna skip me?
oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Ritchie?
I didn't, do you get to vote for officers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Ritchie,
Yes.
All right.
thank you.
This didn't go as seamlessly as I would hope it would go. It's my fault. And finally, for Planning Commission Treasurer, I nominate Ms. Tully.
Secretary.
Secretary.
What did I say, treasurer?
Well, you-
Oh,
If
man.
Not on your game tonight, man.
Bringing my B game tonight. Sorry, everybody, for secretary.
I'll take money though, everybody's got it.
I nominate Judith Tully for secretary.
Support?
We have a motion and support. Would anyone else like to nominate someone else? Hearing no one, then, Ms. Tully, could you conduct a roll call vote for secretary?
Mr. Galley,
Yes.
Mr. Lockran absent, Mr. Mazza,
Yes.
Mr. Patel.
Yes.
Mr. Ritchie,
Yes.
Chairman Savadan.
Yes.
Ms. Tully, yes.
All right, so we have congratulations to everyone. We struggled through that, and so what we're gonna do now, we're gonna move on to item G2, Master Plan Update, Open Space Panel Discussion, and I'm going to pass the torch to Mr. Carlisle, who's gonna moderate this discussion.
Yeah. And we'd like our panel members to dress up to the dais, please. Yeah, might have been a good idea.
Hard on me. No, thank you.
See, they all sat as far away from the moderator as they possibly can. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this evening. I'm Dick Carlisle, Township Planning Consultant. We are assisting the township in conducting the update of the township's master plan. With me tonight are Megan Mason-Minnick and Alyssa Starling from our planning staff at Carlisle Workman Associates. And they will be also helping me out tonight and keeping me on track. So The way we'd like to do this tonight, we have some distinguished panel members who I will introduce in a moment. And we have a series of questions that we would like to pose to them. And then once we do that and go through that round of answers, questions and answers, we would certainly like to open it up to members of the public and who are attending tonight. And again, we're very appreciative of the fact that we have this many people here who will be able to add input or ask questions of our panel members or actually just make a comment. Then we have a little bit of an exercise in the back part of the room, which Megan will explain, and that will really complete the program tonight. Planning Commission will be able to come back up at that point and adjourn the formal part of our meeting. Tonight we have Kristen Wilfang is next to Mr. Fisher there, sitting in Mr. Pytel's seat. Kristen is the administrator for Oakland County of Trails, Transportation, and Environment in the Planning and Economic Development Department. She's been involved in grant acquisition and the development of the Clinton River Trail and have done trail coordination for the county. We'll ask you to speak a little bit more about that role. Oakland County Planning and Economic Development have been very helpful to us in many, many areas in terms of mapping and interpreting natural areas in the township. And Mr. Morocco may want to speak a little bit more about that because he was on the Planning Commission when we did this. But she's been involved in the natural features inventory and the county's green infrastructure vision. At the far end of the table is no stranger, Jerry Fisher, who's been a longtime resident of the township, as well as a supervisor of the township and township attorney. Mr. Fisher is a professor emeritus at Cooley Law School. And before that, joining the faculty was in private practice with Secrets Wordle, with offices in Farmington Hills, Mount Clemens, Lansing, and Grand Rapids. Mr. Fisher is a well-recognized expert in planning and zoning law throughout the state of Michigan, if not even broader, and has served on the Oakland County Parks and Recreation Commission quite a few years as chair of that commission. The next is Mr. Sam Morocco, current trustee for Independence Township. Sam has lived in the township since 1996 and has been owner of MLC Building, a building company involved in a number of projects throughout the township, including a number that involved in historic preservation. Sam served the township in many capacities and on the Planning Commission for well over 15 years, I think, right, Sam?
Yep.
Something like that, yeah. And is now serving on the Construction Board of Appeals as well as the Township Board. The area of open space has been an active area of Sam's interest since in his time on the Planning Commission. And then Sue Julian, who again is no stranger to many of us around here. Sue's the executive director of the Blue Heron Headwaters Conservancy. And Sue might be able to give us a little bit of background about where the Land Conservancy actually started, which would be beneficial for residents who may not be aware of its origin. Sue's been a board member of the Land Conservancy since 2002, serving as president. She's a graduate of Antioch College and Grand Valley State University. Served in the Peace Corps, which I didn't know that, Sue, you know, and was director of education at the Impression 5 Museum in Lansing. She's been a volunteer for numerous things, and many of you probably have encountered Sue, particularly in the Holly area also. So we're really appreciative of all of these four members agreeing to do this tonight. And I'm going to start with the first question. And I'm going to ask Sue, maybe for you to start it out, that in the past, what has been the role of your organization in open space preservation here in Independence Township?
Thanks for the question. I think you know that this conservancy started 50 years ago in Independence Township, and it was called Independence Land Conservancy. In fact, it's still called that. That's our legal name. But we have recently expanded from Independence and then 6 townships in the northern part of the county to 14 sort of following the watershed. So we've always been involved in open space preservation on behalf of the public. A land conservancy has several tools in its toolbox, which we've used over the years, and we may be able to bring up some examples later. But the concept is that land that is preserved as open space is available not only to current residents and increases the value of their property, they live next to undeveloped land, but is available for future generations, as well as preservation of the natural resources.
Great.
So it's, there are, in the United States, maybe 8,000 conservancies. There are about 40 in Michigan. We are one of a dozen or so that are accredited and very active in the state.
That's great. I think it was important to note that that the organization started here in Independence Township by started with some very far-sighted individuals, many of whom are no longer with us, of course. Sam, I'd like to maybe now move on to you and give a brief overview of what your interest has been in this subject and the kind of work you've done on it with the Planning Commission.
Okay, I'm probably the least qualified person up here, but I appreciate being invited. I got on the Planning Commission in 2003. I've been doing historical preservation for about 30 years, so it kind of ties into the character of the community. That's how I get involved with it. When I was the chairman of the Planning Commission, we did the green infrastructure plan through the citizen planner, of course, with Oakland County, which is very similar, larger scale than what we're doing tonight, but very similar in all the same things.
Mm-hmm.
So that was good to work on that, to lay out the mapping of parcel connectivity for animal movements throughout the township, identifying those parcels, having the county map them for us, and then hopefully being able to use those tools to convey to the developers what tree rows and open space is significant as far as animal movement goes, and then working on the Planning Commission side, pushing for less dense development, more open space goes along with that. So that's the preservation of the community, its character, and its open space, and controlled development's pretty much been my focus.
Very good, thank you. Kristen, from your perspective, and this is a little bit broader perspective because you work on it, you work with it from a countywide, regional type basis. The kind of work you do with communities in general, and specifically some of the work that you're familiar with in Independence Township.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. So in the county planning office, we've been doing open space planning for nearly 50 years now. It dates back to some of the documents that were prepared in the 70s and the 80s. And it really looked at some of the master plan ordinances and various other community documents that are put into place. So we've really helped work with local communities and local organizations like the Land Conservancy, watershed councils, and really try to coordinate those efforts from a countywide scale. We have nearly 1.3 million people here in the county. So we've got really urban areas, we've got really rural areas, and a lot of things in between. And there's so many special places that the county has that most folks don't even know about. So here in Independence, I mean, you guys have the headwaters of the Clinton River. That's pretty big. And that was actually one of the first 37 sites that were identified in our first Michigan Natural Features Area, potential natural area coverage that we created. So that was done back in 1987. And most of that property now lies within Independence Oaks County Park. But preserving and protecting those headwaters are essential to a lot of wildlife movements, plant preservation, and those habitat spaces. So we also, I mentioned the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, so that's a group of scientists and biologists that actually go out and do field work, but then they'll also come back and help identify those key areas within a community, and in our case, in the county. So they've actually started doing that work. I believe with the Shiawassee and Huron Headwaters project. Sue, I don't know if you can hold that up, but that was a very in-depth
I remember that project, so.
that Carlisle Wortman actually worked on back in 2000. So it's been a great resource to point back to. In addition to that, we also like to talk about some of the recreational resources. I mentioned Independence Oaks County Park, but we also like to use our trail network and kind of interweave that and connect our parks, open space, waterways together with some of those non-motorized means as well. So our office does a lot of technical assistance, and we're happy to help out.
Thank you.
communities.
And Jerry, you were involved in the very beginning, really putting in place some of the legal mechanisms that the township has used, as well as for other communities. You want to speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Happy to do that. I think one of the most significant things that has had maybe the most impact directly would be I was involved directly in creating the urban service boundary for utilities and limiting utilities to the southern portion of the township and not allowing them to go further north, which then opened the door for maintaining the zoning in the north for open space and natural resource preservation. And I've been thrilled ever since that it has been maintained, and there's every promise that it'll continue. And so that's probably one of the greatest things that I've helped out with. I also created a wetland ordinance for the township in 1973. I think it was the first or second wetland ordinance in Michigan.
Yeah.
And that has had the impact of preserving wetland sensitive areas, basically, particularly in the area of lakes, but elsewhere as well. I did create a woodland ordinance maybe 2 or 3 times that never got adopted, and we don't need to go into those politics, but that was an effort. And as you mentioned, I helped create the PUD that has the tools. Obviously, it has to be administered in this way, but it has the tools for allowing development rights in exchange for preservation, which is an important opportunity for the township. And speaking of the Independence Land Conservancy, I was on the board of the Independence Land Conservancy in the very early days, and probably drafted most of the early conservation easements.
Yeah. Kristen referred to something that is of great significance in this township, and that is the Clinton Huron Headwaters, that is located here in the township. And we also have, extensive system of creeks and such that feed into it, such as Sashabaw Creek. I'm curious, Sue, from your experience, of the particular features that you note in Independence Township, what particular areas, if any, should we be placing a priority in? Wetlands, woodlands, view sheds? I mean, and this is a bit of a broad question, but I'm curious because I know from your ecological experience, you have, some thoughts about that, I think.
I do, but it's a bit of a loaded question because it depends on how you're looking at preservation. Preservation could be maintaining the rural character of the township, which brings you to one set of assumptions and directions to go. Preservation of the natural resources, and the fact that you mentioned that right here in this general area, the 4 main rivers that flow out to the Great Lakes start here. So we have not only the privilege of maintaining that water quality in those streams, but also the responsibility to not mess it up for the people downstream. If you've been in Pontiac in a heavy rain, you'll know that there are roads where you go right down and your car is underwater because all of us in the higher area that's around here have dumped our water down there. So what are we trying to do is the question that leads you then to say, what should the priorities be?
You know, Sam, from your work on the Planning Commission, and now that you're on the board, I mean, from your work on the Planning Commission, are there any particular, along the same lines, any particular features that you feel need to be placed, a higher priority on in terms of future preservation programs?
I'm not sure exactly.
Besides everything.
Well, no, and I think that, I look at it more, we're gonna have growth, you know, it needs to be controlled, you know. I think that capturing huge parcels of property is easier off of big parcels of property, you know. We seem to get bigger parcels accumulated often in the more rural areas than, you know, obviously the other areas are more built out, but I like I mean, not expanding the water district, that's probably one of the biggest safeguards we have in the township, is to make sure that we have lots big enough that would have to be, to sustain septic systems, which automatically enlarges the property. I think we're super fortunate that we have the county park here too, so we have a lot of green space that we do have. The things that the township has done, the clustering options, you know, giving us the tools to have developers, it's kind of a double-edged sword to me, because you have more density combined to create open space. So it's how we do that and the way we do that in the township, I think, is critical, and I can see the advancements in the township, and, you know, like for recently in this project we did where we had a clear-cut line, which isn't something that we characteristically used to have in the township. So when we did the Monarch project, for instance, it was when we did the project down Walden Road where they put I forget the name of the condominium complex there, but very nicely done right down here over the bridge to the left there. When they cleared that land, it was a real eye-opener. I don't think that anyone in the township had seen a mass clear cutting like that, and it really, you know, got everybody's attention, along with the Planning Commission. And then I think that when Monarch came along, we were like, okay, we got to take another look at how we're clear cutting, because in my opinion, revegetation doesn't seem to be working as well as we had hoped, because we're making them plant the pine trees, but they're dying, or it takes 20 years for them to develop. You know, I think that our protective things that I'd like to see, I think we have to protect it in smaller portions that way. There's a lot of studies about undergrowth being much more beneficial to in every aspect than say revegetation of an area. So because it's so hard to create green space in tighter areas, I think that those are the ways that we need to kind of do it, is to bring things to the center and leave the perimeter. If we can't get a large stand somewhere, you know, that would be ideal, but it's not as likely. But to be conscious of that. But overall, I think the township's done we have a huge amount of woodland and rural areas, so we're, I think we just have to focus on the smaller developments, to make sure we're getting all the benefit we can out of, or the least impact, let's say.
Kristen, when you, from the county level, when you're working, and I know you've done green infrastructure plans with many of the Oakland County communities. I mean, how do you help communities prioritize the resources that they should be trying to preserve?
Yeah, definitely. So I think first and foremost, connectivity. Anything that provides connectivity to those high-quality natural areas is essential to maintain. We also like to look at those edge portions of the protected natural area as well, because those edge species are very different than what you'll find in interior core of a natural area too. So a lot of times on the edge you'll find a lot of degraded, poor soils, just because a lot of times they're up against like a roadway, so they're constantly exposed to salt and paving and that type of thing. So I would say connectivity is probably the most important thing as we're looking at open space. Just making sure that you maintain those wildlife corridors, make sure you're looking at your wetland areas, because those serve key essential services as well for water quality.
And Jerry, I'm going to just switch this question up a little bit for you, but from the standpoint of both policy and ultimate, protection, how would you advise communities or this community to place priority on those things that are of most significance?
Well, we are built out to some degree, and my thought is that we have the ability to look at what we have left that's undeveloped, and we may want to include areas where we could anticipate redevelopment as well, and make a plan, a particular plan for those areas. And if we don't plan them ahead of time, and we just react, one at a time as they come up, I don't think we gain as much as if we coordinate the effort. And I mean, it's like connectivity.
Yeah.
If you're going to plan connectivity, and somebody comes in and moves the chess piece over here and blocks everybody from doing what you really want to do ultimately, that's a big problem. And so I think planning for connectivity and other things that are related to that, and open space, view sheds are critical in that regard. And so I think if we did a careful inventory of what we have available, and then figure out with the objectives that we have, and I think we can easily agree on what our objectives are, create setbacks and preservation areas. Now, of course, in doing these things, it all sounds great on one side of it when you're just talking about planning, but the other side of it is that somebody owns this property.
Right.
And so, we have to deal with that in maybe more than one way. One way would be to allow some kind of bonuses if areas are maintained. The other thing is to find out what the appetite of people in the township would be for actually buying some of these corridor areas, and we could. I think the smartest thing we could do, we don't have to buy the whole property. We can buy easements in the property, like conservation easements. People would still get the benefit of setbacks and open space for themselves and maintain that value for their property, but at the same time retain the ability to have view sheds and connectivity for animals. And we're just squeezing the daylights out of all the animal habitat at this point, and so we're that's a problem.
That's why the deer are in our backyards.
Yeah. Deer, coyotes, exactly, and fox.
Yeah.
I love to see all those animals, but
Yeah, they're coming from someplace else too.
yeah. They just shouldn't be on my deck.
So, so let me pose this question then. So why is this even important? Why is this important to the sustainability, the economic viability, the livability of this community or any community? Why is it even important, Sam?
Well, it's quality of life related, for sure. I think anytime you see something pretty opposed to something ugly affects your mood. It could affect your livelihood. There's a reason why people are moving up here. Those other townships are coming from where were rural at one point, and got developed past the point of the flavor of the people that are relocating. I think we're a more unique place, I think, in Oakland County than most, because we're the last town really on the corridor of I-75 in Oakland County. There are other towns north of us, but they're off Bleeder, you know, you gotta drive to
Well,
get to
the-
them. We're,
The last one with utilities too.
right, and we're on, you know, we have 3 exits on the expressway, so we don't have to drive internally through our town every time we wanna exit and head somewhere, you know. The rural character of it is what's drawing the people here, and we just, you know, that's our focus, is we have to keep that. We know why we live up here. I know why I moved up here, you know. I think I'd be interesting to find out how many people are actually from here and how many people actually have come here for the township.
Well, we know in the last probably 40 years, at least, you know, 20 to 25,000 people have come here from someplace else.
Right, so that's telling you something.
Yeah,
And it's not, they're not coming here because of work.
Yeah.
They're not, you know, they're coming here to when they're, this is where they come when they're not working.
Yeah.
You know, to relax and enjoy it, so, that's why you gotta stay on this stuff, to make sure it doesn't change, that attitude, you
So
know.
Sue, I know you get into these same kind of discussions all the time because you're out there selling conservation. So how do you convince people that this is good for the community and it has broader benefits than just for preservation's sake?
Well, I don't think you have to start with saying, do good for the community. It's the question of, is doing good for yourself also doing good for the community? And that's usually the discussion that we get into, so that if a person, I live on 10 acres, so I'd like to split the back of my 10 acres. I was delighted to move into a rural area. I'm not from Clarkson, I'm from the Holly area. But I don't have the ability to do that because of zoning. So we get involved with trying to see what is possible given the regulations and the tenor of a particular township, and then see if we can suggest things to the individual. And it's not really a hard sell, because as we've said, people have moved out here because they want to be in a semi-rural area, in a smallish city. It has some of the perks, enough, and we can go somewhere else if we need something else. So that there is a general sense that it's a good idea to protect things near you and in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
So it is not as hard a sell as you might think. Now, times have changed, because there used to be quite a few people who would consider just donations of land, and with the really high price of land now, we don't find that happening as often. So we kind of get pushed into, can we buy a conservation easement or buy land?
Ah.
And then we're talking money, money, money.
Jerry, if you could perhaps, you know, enlighten us a little bit again on this question about why it's important and how you actually defend its importance when you take certain actions to regulate preservation, or you incorporate certain ordinances that allow for it by incentive also. There is a legal context to this, and you know, how within the legal context of Michigan law, you know, do you advise communities to think about these things?
Well, that's a great question, and if I could answer it in 2 parts.
Please.
The one part is just a sheer Michigan Constitution thing, and Article 4, Section 52 of the Michigan Constitution, it specifies that the preservation of natural resources is of paramount public concern and of paramount public importance. And so I can't tell you how many briefs I've written that in to support a lot of these preservation regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And the other half of it too is one of the best what would you call it, research and development places for the benefit of open space and preservation would be Oakland Township. And I represented Oakland Township for 20 years, and basically during their growth process, and we put in some really significant, really tough preservation provisions, And that township went from, you know, an average home cost of here up to, you know, here. And it wasn't because of their location. It wasn't because of lakes, because they don't have really big lakes and all that kind of thing. It was because of the natural resource preservation. And, you know, it was open space, and it was any other kind of natural resources that existed, and view sheds and vistas and all that sort of thing. And, I mean, you get, you know, basketball players and football players buying property out there. There was some guy from General Motors that owned a tank, and I think he drove a tank around protecting the exterior of his property. But these are people that, you know, that were willing to pay huge amounts of money. So my point is, for saying that, is that in addition to the idea of quality of life, which is, I agree 100% with what Sam was saying, quality of life is really critical. But I think a great case can be made that doing this preservation enhances property values significantly.
Yeah.
And so I think you have that argument also.
And that's what feeds into the whole argument that it feeds into the basic welfare of the community, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Well, Kristen, you probably walk into the room in many communities in Oakland County and face skeptics about why they should be promoting preservation and particular aspects of it. How do you present that from a point of view of why it's important to a community?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say especially since the pandemic, I would say people have reconnected with nature in a way that they have not done in a long time. It's become known as essential infrastructure. And so protecting our open space, especially our parks, Independence Township has over 15% of its land base as protected open space in some type or another. So a lot of that is parkland, but I mean, when you look at it, it's also an economic driver, right? So you have very passive areas like Independence Oaks North, where you've got Upper Bushman Lake. You could go out there, you can fish, find some massive fish out there and throw it back because it's catch and release. But then you also have areas like Pine Knob where you could go skiing or check out the music theater, and it's very active recreation, right? So that's a local tourism driver too.
Yeah.
So from an economic standpoint, not only property values, not only quality of life, but it's economic vitality within communities too. It can be a draw.
And you just raised, I think, a very important, and many people may not be aware of, but the fact is that Upper Bushman Lake was private property, owned privately for many years. In fact, we had, you know, numerous development proposals for that piece of property, and we were continually, you know, trying to work with Oakland County to acquire that land. And eventually, that happened, correct? Yeah, and now it's part of Independence Oaks Park, correct?
It is.
Yeah. And so, you know, Upper Bushman is really a key to the headwaters of the Clinton River in that area, so.
Dick, I wonder if I could add something.
Please.
You asked Kristen if she goes to other communities, how does she talk to them? And what I want to say is Independence Township has such a long history of looking at and being careful that they have not cut off their options. There are other places that have made what I would call to be unwise decisions, and the possibility of maintaining open space and having that as a characteristic of the community has almost gone past in some places in Oakland County.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's true from our work and experience elsewhere. Sam, did I ask you this question?
The one,
Yeah.
this one, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. Well, I'm curious that, you know, we have seen some things in this township that we have done well, and maybe some things that we need to work on. And I'm going to give you the first shot at that, Sam. I know you have some opinions about both of those.
Yeah, I think I want to talk about how we work forward from it, you know? So my belief is that what I was hoping we could get out of something like this is a consensus of where we want to go in the future. I think that, you know, as a builder for 30 years working in different communities, I know when I'm gonna go to a community and when they're gonna be, you know, how, a lot of times how I'm gonna be received with what we're talking about, or how they're gonna act towards, you know, outsiders and all of that. I think it starts at the door, and that's kind of what I've been kind of pushing, is that I think we need to come up with a consensus of how do we wanna use, clear-cutting restrictions, which is something newer that we've been talking about, you know, how to buffer people better. I'd like to see the developments go farther off the road if we're gonna do development, so that they're not in our faces. If people wanna live in denser communities, my opinion's always been that's fine, but I'd rather not see it. That's your business to do it, but I think the visual optics of it hurt the township, so I think that we should push developments farther off the road with boulevard entranceways, hopefully with natural vegetation, not revegetation, but if so, done well, which we have some projects that have been really well. Revegetation to me doesn't work as well because of the conditions in Michigan. You can only plant pine trees a certain time of the year that they're gonna be survive the best, and not others, and then they die, and then we don't hold enough money to hold them accountable, and then if they replant them, they never mature, you know, so if you can, I think that we should focus on things of, try to keep what's already mature, cause it has a larger, rate of success, you know? I think that if the consensus of what we wanna do can be conveyed, to Brian and the planning department and the consultants, and from my experience on the planning commission for almost 20 years, is that if the developer gets our flavor before he starts the process, you know, he's gonna bring a better plan, and we have to just, you know, demand a better plan, you know, with more open space and better amenities for the community. But then, because what happens isn't, it's a natural thing, is a plan comes through and it's not that great of a plan, but they've spent a lot of money on the plan, and it's, you know, the planning commission, other people, sometimes myself, you feel sympathetic to the petitioner that he was led down a road, spent all this money on plans, and then all of a sudden we're tweaking the plan and changing it, and that's not fair to them either. So if we wanna attract good development, we want them to be profitable. That's part of it, because that's what attracts them, but we don't wanna be taken advantage of at the same rate. But, so we should be very forthright to say, hey, this is a new day, you know? We're doing our master plan, our new master plan's outlaid this plan. These are the new rules, come to Independence Township. You should expect to know that when you get here, so you're not wasting time and energy. And, cause I believe, touching on what Jerry said, is high-density development typically is done by larger corporations that build houses, you know, big, massive projects, because they're funded by those big companies. Smaller subdivisions with bigger lots and less houses have a better opportunity to attract a smaller, mid-sized building company that maybe does higher quality, more custom, higher-end homes, like in Oakland Township. They've got big building companies, you know, bigger than a little guy, but they're focused on that product line. They can make money on big lots and expensive houses with less density. The business model of the bigger national companies is, you know, smaller houses, you know, more density, high volume. So if you control how small the lots are gonna be and how many lots they can have, and we're not in a hurry to develop, because I think we're pretty good financially how we are and at the pace we've been going, that my suggestion would be is to go down that road. Have a consensus of the community, convey that to Brian and the consultants, and drive that point home in the upfront. It's fair to everybody, and then we'll know what we should expect. But I think that's the first step, and it's the fairest way to go. But let everyone know the rules have changed, and we want, you know, we're going to do it a little different here with the last little bit of build out we have.
Jerry, you have, you know, you've got a long view on this from the standpoint of the time you've lived and worked, you know, in this community. What would you view of some of the things that we've done that have been, success stories, and where do you see that we could improve?
Well, we have actually, promoted the planned unit development and promoted the preservation of open space in connection with developments under that model. And that can be large developments and small developments. I mean, PUD can apply, we don't have a minimum acreage for that, and so that can work along with the buffering or cluster zoning and so forth for special land uses and so forth. But honestly, I think one of the things that would be the most helpful or very helpful, in addition to what we have, because we've got a lot of those things in place now, and it kind of plays into the point that Sam was making, is that I think building in open space preservation into our design guidebook.
Mm.
If you want to put somebody on notice of what we expect, here's our guidebook. This is the way we expect you to do it. And so I think that, and we've done that, and I think thanks to you, Dick, we did that many years ago with the design guidebook, and that was a good start. A lot of us had to help you, but
I need a lot of help, Jerry.
but I think that,
everything I learned from you, remember?
That's true. That's true. But we really had. I think that really puts people going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So that they don't spend all the money on their plans and so forth, only to run into a dead end.
Yeah.
Here's what we expected, and if you do it this way, you're going to have an easy time of it.
So you've also been a longtime observer of what we've done in Independence Township, and what is your response to this question? What have we done well, and what do we need to improve on?
Well, Independence Township has done a lot well and needs to pat itself on the back, but also to understand, as a progressive community, it needs to look to its role in the wider world.
Mm.
And, we read about monarch butterflies disappearing, but do we have an ordinance that allows us to have milkweed in our yard? Well, maybe not. Maybe we need to look at some larger issues and bring them back home. This is the ecologist in me talking, and it's not in opposition to anything you've been saying. It's actually complementary. But I think that Independence Township does have a chance to do even better than it had before, and to be known for that. We often look for the expression of progressive ideas, maybe in Ann Arbor. Why not Clarkston? Why not Independence? I want to say that I think that we have some big possibilities here if we're clear on what direction we're trying to go.
Kristen, this may be a little unfair question to ask you, but if you have some observations about from what you're aware of what we have done well here, and also where you think we could improve.
Yeah, certainly. So I think first and foremost, looking at the roadway network, it seems like the road rights of way take up quite a considerable amount of space within the township here. But are there green infrastructure opportunities? And I'm not just talking about preservation, but are there things that we could do like bioswales and replanting native plants and getting rid of the turf grass because there's added benefits for stormwater? Are there things that we can do in our center median islands, especially here along Sashabaw, that maybe we can replant some of those natives and create some of the habitat for the butterflies and create some of those opportunities? It's always great to get school kids involved too. You've got the elementary school right here, and are there things that we can do to help raise their awareness of the importance of some of the ecological benefits to preservation of open space? So that's
very good. Well, thank you. What I would like to do is, now allow members of the audience to either ask questions or make a comment. We have the Brian. Do we have a microphone here?
Yep, right
Okay. But let me, if I could, Megan, if you could,
It's working. It's
Huh?
on. It's on.
okay. And, because maybe we don't need to have everybody answer the same question, but does anybody, member of the public, have something that they would like to either make a comment or ask a question of? Right here, thank you.
I don't know if this is really the appropriate meeting, but I think that the last three developments, I've only lived here since 2003, and I've been very disappointed in what has happened. The last straw that would break the camel's back is this Pulte horrendous mess down there. They did the same thing down on Clintonville, when it clear cut. And of course, the people up there by Deer Lake at Dixie and I-75, I was here many times when they basically begged the planning commission to let them come up with a different plan. I was here when a gentleman who was an architect for development said he would do a plan for free if you just wouldn't let that happen. I haven't heard anyone who has said, oh wow, that was a good idea. In fact, mostly people are thinking whoever approved that should have been drawn and quartered. So I don't want to get thrown out of this meeting, and I don't want to be rude, but really, that was ugly up there. It was horrible. That's your welcome to Independence Township. And this thing, when we saw this that happened on Walden Road, what you did to those people's lifestyle and homes, I mean, you just took away the character of that entire lovely stream of just middle America. It was just, including my husband, who's not that fussy about things. I mean, so if you were on that and if you voted for that, you really should be ashamed. And in another time in our lives, you would be pilloried, tarred, and feathered. So
Well, it sounds
I
a little
hope
violent.
that this is no, I'm truly.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
that, I don't guess I don't hear a question there, so
I know.
your comments
No,
are welcome.
You keep asking them, saying, what did we do well? I think you need to look at what did you do that was really offensive and that nobody in this community, unless they live
I did ask that
in
question.
the other,
Yeah, what
in
we
the
could
other
improve upon.
quadrant.
Yeah.
Why are we completely throwing this corner? I live up on Pine Knob.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, why are you ruining this complete area? You gotta do something. You gotta stop. Every time they cut down trees, the noise level goes up for us from the highway. I mean, we live here. We came here. We came here from Sterling Heights to get away from that. So, please.
Thank you.
Stop.
Okay, I think over here.
I'll stand up because I'm fun-sized. Chelsea O'Brien, I'm the executive director at the Clarkston Family Farm. And I also moved here about 10 years ago, and I'm having a little bit of PTSD being in this room because I was part of that. What used to be the Deer Hill Highlands development, they changed their name to Encore. And I'm going to take a breath here for a minute. I love all of the conversation. These are exceptional panelists. I know them all individually. I love what you're saying, Sam. I wrote down, the rules have changed. That's what we're going to tell developers when they come to this town. Jim Brook and I were having this conversation not but 2 days ago, I think, in our little market at the farm. What teeth is my question, a specific question, that the master plan will have? Because even 10 years ago, and I sat in those meetings and I was part of that group, and I know the architect that you're talking about, and all of these discussions came to the fore about cluster developments and setbacks. And I think that there were some concessions made after years of really intense conversation and huge public outcry. And I'm talking specifically about the Encore development on Deer Hill and Dixie Highway, which I pass every day and frankly is an embarrassment. And then we did it again, and then we did it again. So I would love to see all of this really thoughtful, positive, progressive conversation actually go into language that has some teeth, because this idea of it's the spirit of the master plan, well, what does that really mean when it actually comes down to it? I found very little when we have people that are like, well, we're going to give a nod to the language. We all care about the environment. But in actuality, we're just going to still let them do what they want to do because it makes sense financially. I'm not really sure what the decision making was at that panel, but I was personally very disappointed. However, motivated to start an educational farm for kids. And I got to tell you, Dick, I sat across the table from you about 6 years ago, and Paul Brown, and at the time Pat Kittle, who was the Independent Township Supervisor, Dr. Rock, who was the superintendent at the time, all of these wonderful decision makers in the community agreed that we do need a space in Independence Township that can help to educate children. So I would like to just leave with two sentiments. The first is we all want to do what's best for our community. I, in particular, along with many of you, care deeply about what's best for kids. Our research shows that our young people are really struggling, guys. Mental health issues are a big issue. Anxiety is a big issue. I know our panelists can speak to this. Green space matters. Even looking at green space, you're talking about these edges and having the trees, and it lowers our blood pressure. Our kids need this. So let's be thinking about that. Certainly the economics make sense, but it's what's best for kids. We see about 10,000 kids now each year at the Clarkston Family Farm, which is a huge testament to what we've been able to do as a community to serve our youth, to connect with nature. We host a Monarch Butterfly Festival every year that is growing. Sue's been a part of that. We educate kids about pollinators. But I would love to see, and I know I'm getting up on my soapbox, language in this master plan that actually has some teeth. Now, let you go.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Yeah.
Hi, Bill Scarborough, 5704 Nob Hill Circle. Your zoning ordinance is what has the teeth. Your master plan is a plan, and it's only as good as how closely it's adhered to. And it should lead you to ordinances. I have some suggestions for some ordinance changes that I think would promote open space. Your ordinances, in my mind, is a #1 place to start. First one is your setbacks, and Sam mentioned the setbacks. There's been a lot of criticism of the Walden project. I think what's done there with the setbacks off the major roads is obscene. You feel, you go down Walters, you feel like you can reach their back porches from the road. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it's pretty darn close. You go down Clintonville, and on the one side, on the east side, you've got a beautiful green belt between the road and Oakhurst. And then you did Pinehurst on the other side. Totally just destroyed what could have been a very gorgeous road. I think you should increase the setbacks off of main roads. Go take a drive through Northville Township. They've done that. There are many main roads, 7 Mile Road. I can't even think of the one. Anyway, Sheldon Road. And you drive down there and you can't even see the backyards because it's such a deep setback and so heavily wooded. I encourage everybody to drive through Northville Township. It's beautiful. You mentioned the clear cut restrictions. You need that, and you need that in conjunction with a tree preservation ordinance where the developer is required to inventory every tree over a certain size. He's required to indicate which ones he's going to cut down, and he has to have a plan to replace those elsewhere. And finally, your density calculation. Density bonuses are a good idea. I like them, but I think you're making a mistake and losing a great opportunity. It's my understanding that when you calculate your densities, this township computes it across the entire parcel of land that's going to be developed, even if that land has undevelopable land like wetlands and lakes. When you give a density bonus based upon the entire acreage of that parcel, including the undevelopable land, you're actually doing the opposite of encouraging open space. Because if you got a 100-acre parcel, and let's say 6 units per acre, that'd be 600 units, and 20 of it is open space, you're gonna put, or is undevelopable, you're gonna put those 600 units in 80 acres, which without a density bonus would have been less than that. And the undeveloped land isn't gonna get developed regardless of whether you give them a density bonus or not. So I think you should be calculating the density based upon only developable land. These are 3 examples that I have seen tried and used, and they work. I highly and this is a committee, but hopefully, I'm thinking maybe you can put that in your I don't know if you're gonna come up with recommendations to the board or the planning commission or what, but if so, maybe you can consider those and put them in those recommendations. And if not, maybe the planning commission people that are here can consider that. Thank you.
Just as a matter of clarification, in our cluster ordinance, we require a parallel plan to be submitted. So we don't calculate density by including wetlands. So back here.
Is this the last chance for public comment, or?
No, we have, please.
So just let me clarify in terms of the public comment. So at the end of the meeting, there'll be public comment per the agenda. And then also, I'm sure many of you have seen in the rear, there's a bunch of boards. And there are some activities there where we're asking about what you would want to preserve and asking people to mark up maps. And there's also some open space techniques that are described that came from our panel when we were talking to them about this in December. And Dick, if you don't mind, can I take just a minute to describe 2 things that didn't come up? And I'm going to ask maybe Kristen to weigh in a little bit more on those. 2 of the things that weren't described in the panel's discussion, which was excellent, and thank you very much, were an open space millage, which many other communities have. And so it's a tax millage where then the township itself has money to either purchase or help a land conservancy purchase conservation easements or property. And then also Scioto Township, which is actually where I live, has done a very unique program which is, and they've had an open space millage for a long time, but they were finding that they had some challenges. And so Kristen, I was wondering if you felt comfortable describing that program where they're purchasing the property, restricting it, and then selling it again.
So I know very little about it, but yes, that is essentially, so it's buy, protect, sell. So the township will actually purchase a piece of property, they'll put a conservation easement on it or protect it in some way, usually through conservation easement, and then they'll actually go through and sell the property back.
It's basically adding deed restrictions.
Yes,
Yeah.
so it's.
So those are 2 other tools that could be in your toolbox that you don't have at this point in time in terms of a dedicated funding source and then some creative ways to use that.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in on the millage too. So Oakland Township was brought up earlier, but Rochester Hills also has a green space millage. I don't know if it's still active, but I know that they have a green space advisory board. They have residents that actually review parcels that are brought forth to them and kind of score them. And then the city will actually purchase those properties using the millage funds. And it's separate and it's different than their park properties. They're very passive areas and they're meant for open space preservation.
So, yes, I see your hand. So, see your hand and then your hand.
Thank you. I did move to Clarkston about 10 years ago and have since volunteered with various groups, including Blue Heron, and just love our community. I guess my main question is the big picture. I did move because I love the green space. I love the heritage side of the community, and want to continue that tradition of all the people that have worked towards this end and keep that going for my children. So more of a bigger picture, yes, it's painful to watch the clear cutting when I drive by. I know it's the reality of building. I'm not saying it's okay. I just know that's in the past. How do we move on to the future? And I guess I do like to look at the bigger picture. So my question to the panel, since we have you here and you're all such wonderful resources, is as a community, Independence, how do we take a look at what we have and assess, is this enough? Where is that cutting off point where some communities have reached and they're beyond that point of this is not enough green space?
That's a great question.
So how do we come up with, and I happen to be a biodiversity geek, so the new rule was 30 by 30, which is a great goal. 30% of your sustainable land to preserve biodiversity, so we still have pollinators for our food in the future. Can Independence be part of that kick? I hope so. I think we have enough wealth and knowledge and intelligence in this community to be part of that global ambition. But how does that actually work? Does it have to be a millage until we get a millage? If we get a millage, is there another way? Does the panel have another suggestion on how our community could come up with a goal and stick to that goal? So when we see for sale signs on a beautiful woodlot, what triggers a community review? Is it only the master plan? Is it only one guy sitting behind a planning office that takes on that entire responsibility? Or is there a group that can get together and come up with some future decision making?
That's the big question. Who would like to tackle that one?
Well, I guess I just want to say one thing. Coming into this meeting, I wasn't sure what kind of questions. I wasn't even sure what we'd all be talking about, if you want to know. But I guess I'm hoping that as a result of this meeting, we will come together with a task force that looks and tries to answer those kind of questions, because I think that it's not always the same answer for each parcel. When I held up this document, which was funded by EPA back in 2000, and Carlisle Wortman, others were involved in this, there's a lot of tools in the toolbox. Whether we have the will to do that, I think has to do with getting out the word and bringing people together. So the idea of running a millage campaign is one way to get the public sentiment that, are you willing to pay $60 a year to preserve the kind of lifestyle that you enjoy right now? You really get people's attention when you ask, are you willing to put out a little money to make something happen,
Well, I have a quick answer to this.
Why don't you stand up and identify yourself?
Yeah, well, my name's Derek Smith. I'm the Parks and Recreation Director here for Independence Township. One mechanism that we have and what we struggle with is getting people in our Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. In that committee, we have a dedicated CIP for my Parks and Recreation Department. If we could get some support from
Tell
our
them what
residents
CIP
on that
is.
advisory committee.
What is CIP?
Capital Improvement Program. So our CIP, we have dedicated money within our budget for capital improvement projects. Our master plan was just passed Tuesday night, and I know a big part of that master plan was the acquisition of property for just this purpose. So if we could get some people that are passionate about this to sit on our advisory committee, we can then make recommendations to the Board of Trustees to adopt into that capital improvement plan for the acquisition of some of these connector pieces and some of these open spaces that we're all talking about. So just one suggestion.
Thank you.
Yes, but we
Go
still have more.
Go ahead, have her talk.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Emily Duthan. I'm president of the board for Blue Heron Headwaters Conservancy, and I just wanted to touch base on some of the ideas that have been tossed out. I think there's some really good thoughts here. There's been a little bit of talk of the 30 by 30 initiative, and I wanted to make sure that people know what that is. It's a global recognition that we need to protect 30% of the land and water on this planet, not only for our personal benefit, not just for diversity, because all of these natural areas provide what are called ecosystem services that sustain all of us. All of these natural areas provide pollinators, as some have mentioned. They purify our drinking water. They manage our stormwater so that we don't have the floods and droughts. They allow rainwater to recharge our groundwater. Here in Independence Township, we are drinking groundwater. This groundwater largely comes from wetlands that we need to be protecting. We tend to think of swamps as wasteland, but these are the kidneys of the earth, they've been called. This is where our drinking water comes from. I've also noticed that particularly during COVID, I live near a small preserve, a small nature preserve. I have never seen so many people using that nature preserve as I did during COVID. People needed to go out to local areas, to green space and recreate, go for a walk. We realized how important this is for mental health. And so we need to be preserving these areas. The local conservancy, I'd like to think of Blue Heron Headwaters as our community's local conservancy, protecting these areas for the community as a whole. We've talked about some ideas for open space millage and funding. The Conservancy does a lot of partnerships with municipal governments in this area, and we started in Independence Township. This is sort of our base. I would love to see some sort of partnership. There have been a millage in the past, and other communities in this area also have millages. A conservation easement is one way to support or preserve green space where, in partnership with ideally a land conservancy, the conservancy essentially owns the development rights, and since the conservancy will not develop it, the land is preserved in perpetuity, but it is owned privately. It may be owned by the conservancy, it may be owned by the municipality, or it may be owned by a private owner, so that you're not taking away anybody's property rights. The landowner controls what happens on the property, controls who goes on the property. Some landowners want it open to the public. Some landowners want to keep it for themselves. Whatever the landowner wants, it's their property. And this is worked out and can be changed annually in an annual management plan to some degree. Or it can be preserved in the wording of the conservation easement. There are a lot of possibilities and lots of tools, as you have mentioned, to make these things happen. And I really would love to see more of this in Independence Township.
Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to have make a question or ask a question or make a comment? Here you go. And I will go online after I finish this up.
Hi, I'm Jim Bruick, and I'm involved in a number of different operations or committees. I chair the biophilic team in Clarkston, and we're starting on a bioswale project around storm drains, for example. I'm part of the Wildflower Association of Michigan, the Wildwoods Organization, et cetera, et cetera. But one of my observations, I also have a small business. I do natural shorelines on inland lakes. And most of Oakland County, the inland lakes, what the beauty is to have pure grass from your back door all the way to the water's edge. And when you get to the water's edge, you want a steel seawall there, so nothing is disturbed. So what's frustrating is that you talk about all the benefits of the connectivity zones, the wildlife, and yet people don't seem to get it. I mean, a lot of us do, but I think most people don't. Just look at the way they treat their own property. If you got people they cut 10 acres of land, with turf grass, for what purpose? To burn more exhaust into the atmosphere?
Enjoy cutting grass, apparently.
So I was taking a little different twist from the big, parcel approach to the small parcel approach, which is how do you incentivize people for the right behavior and managing their property that it's more sustainable in the long term. That's an educational challenge, but if you can cover that, get over that, I think the rest of it falls in place. It's not easy though. I mean, my own eyes, I see it, and it's kind of frustrating and hard to understand how people maybe say one thing or live one way, but they, they just don't behave the way you think they should.
Thank you. Any other, okay, we have two more comments back here.
Thank you. I'm just going to respond directly to Jim about that. Just on my thoughts that I think the way of thinking might shift if we come to realize that the built environment is not separate from the natural environment. If maybe 15% of Independence Township is pure natural environment, and that's preserved for all the ecological functions, that's great. But all of the rest of that is built and constructed for human uses, and it's how do we want to see that and use it. And a lot of us, I think, do want to see that used for environmental purposes, in conjunction with all of the human things that we need and want to do with it. And so I think maybe being explicit in the language of the master plan when we're talking about what it means to construct and build, that it means to do so with the natural environment too.
Yeah, and you can require low-impact development standards on every project. That's something that's very commonplace in Seattle, Portland, and that's why those places are now environmental meccas. Like, people love living in those cities, and there's cities that have balanced both density and being sustainable. So it's not like that we can't develop. We can develop if we need to, but it needs to be done in a very sustainable, thoughtful manner, and that includes having very strict rules with teeth. And if you break those rules, you should have to pay. Like, sorry, I was not expecting to get handed the microphone, but so, like, I mean, I care as well. I live in downtown, so I like the urban space, but I agree with everything everyone else has said about the large parcels. I mean, I've talked to Sue about some large parcels that I really think should be preserved outside of right downtown that are very special. So, I mean, we kind of have to keep an eye on things and then have planning documents that give us a backbone, because the developers are going to come in, see the rules, and then go up to those lines. And if we don't have the documents to protect ourselves, the reality is they're going to go up to that line. Like, that's what they do, you know? So it's a two-sided coin. Like, so, I mean, we've obviously got enough people who are motivated. We've seen the consequences of inaction, and now here's a call. Like, let's rise to the occasion. And Clarkson and our area will only benefit for the longevity, and we'll get smarter and better together. So, I mean, I'm sure it'll end up being fine. We've got enough smart minds and, frankly, money in Clarkson to make any of this happen. So it's just, let's put it together, be done.
Thank you. Did I see another hand up over here? Yes.
Thank you for your patience with me speaking twice. I wanted to thank Jim and Claire and Amanda for reminding me of a couple of other things that I wanted to build on. Some folks were asking about what teeth we can put on here. There are some very specific municipal ordinances that would help implement the ideas that are in this room. Number one would be an ordinance, as Jim has pointed out, encouraging, not only allowing, but encouraging people to plant native plants in rain gardens, for stormwater management, and so on. Right now, we have some antiquated 1950s era weed ordinance that says you can't have plants that grow more than, I think it's 8 inches high in the township. We can fix this. We do want people to be planting native plants. It's good for the environment. It's part of the 30 by 30 initiative. We need to, as Dr. Talamy has said, and some of us in this room are familiar with his work, we need to stop thinking of nature as being out there. Nature is part of our lives. It is in our backyards. It's in our front yards. And we need to allow it to be in our front yards, allow it to have native plants in our front yards that will help with the diversity and managing stormwater. Jim is doing a lot of work with stormwater management and building residential bioswales throughout the city. This is great stuff. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments of the audience? Because if not, I want to go, if there's anybody
Can I just make a comment?
Yes, please.
Building on what, I think it was Mr. Scarborough, is that right? Yeah, the whole idea of the master plan is as a guide, and the zoning ordinance has the teeth. And he's absolutely right as a general rule, but to bring this back to why we're here, namely the master plan,
Right.
it's very important if we can put standards and specific enough plans in the master plan and guidelines and all that, we can refer to them in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
So, because you can regulate in the zoning ordinance by making reference to other planning documents. So I think that's the value of working on this here.
Great.
I just wanted to bring it back to.
Yep, good. Thank you. Yes.
Kevin Bushrow.
We're just recording this, so that.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Kevin Bushrow, former planning commissioner for a few years here in Independence Township. One of the things I actually was watching on TV and just wanted to come here in person and join you guys. So I'm a little late, so I apologize. But
I didn't recognize.
anyways,
You got dressed again.
I did. I got dressed up. This is formal attire here. Yeah, essentially, one of the things I wanted to make a comment on is the PUD guidelines. Over the years, as a planning commissioner and as a bystander after I left, a lot of the items that you guys have mentioned about the development across the street and other areas have really fallen under the PUD ordinances. And it's a great tool, but it's also a very risky tool. And I think in this township, it's been, let's just say it needs to be looked at again, and guidelines need to restrict its use and its abuse. It's allowed people have less concern for the environment and less concern for people's privacy and less concern for the neighbors to allow developments that we don't really agree with. So if we want to make a change, I think we really need to start with the PUD structure and consider how that law is written. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you. I didn't recognize you. Need to take your hat off. So. Any other comments from public? Oh, is there anybody that's participating remotely that would like to make a comment or ask a question? Okay, seeing none. Well, first of all, I want to thank members of, is there somebody?
No, just.
Okay. Members of the public, thank you very much for participating and making very useful comments and asking very great questions. Second of all, we want to thank our 4 panel members for giving up their evening tonight, having some very important comments and preparing for this. And so let's give them a round of applause, please. So you'll also note that all the planning commissioners are here and have been listening to this discussion and are the body, that will be recommending the master plan and ultimately ordinance changes if there are to be any to the township board. So again, thank you all. Megan, you want to make a reminder about what we've got back there?
Sure. After the, so the planning commission is going to come back up. They have a few more items for business. And then that should only take about 5 minutes, right, Mr. Chair?
Maybe 2.
Maybe 2. And then we both need to come to the back. And again, we're asking you to make some choices about what to preserve, what different techniques to use. Find any one of us, and our panelists have volunteered also to hang around afterwards to answer any questions. Also, if during that time you have other things that occur to you, we'll have note cards where you can make comments, and then that will be part of the record that will go to the Planning Commission as part of the master plan development.
Yep, great.
So. What about the draw? So the draw was that how many acres are preserved in the township. So
Right.
hopefully that you put something down. And Dick, what's the answer?
Oh, it's 15%.
15%?
Yeah, it's 3,500 acres.
3,500 acres, 15% of Independence Township is currently preserved as permanent open space, either in private or public ownership.
And I should mention that we are, you may not What do I have to do?
Talk to the mic so the people.
I did. I'm talking. I thought I was talking to the mic. You know, we're sitting in an area that I know that many of you have had a lot of concern about, but it actually, this area, part of this area, it includes one of the more successful public acquisitions of open space that's taken place in the last 20 years. Not only was the land a conservation easement acquired, but it prevented an additional 500 homes from being built on what we now know is, it's not called the Fountains, it used to be called Spring Lake Golf Course. The township got an advisory vote from the public, and it was passed overwhelmingly for the township to spend, I think, about $1 million to purchase the development rights. So it has been done in this township. That's also part of our regional drain. It's also part of an extensive wetland system that we've preserved. That's our wetland bank. So, you know, I wanted to make sure we mention that because some of these tools that you mentioned have been done, but maybe not as extensively as we need to do, you know, moving forward in the future. So, anyway. So now we want to.
I just want to ask you, how do we, as the public, who have our own lives and jobs, make certain that all of the things that have been said here and in prior meetings, can we do to make sure that doesn't happen? What can we do?
There's an old saying, is policy is made by from those who show up.
Yeah.
So you can't sit at home when we have public hearings and public meetings.
I've been here and seen them ignored.
Well,
To get these teeth that these gentlemen are talking about,
Well.
this gentleman.
And I think in terms of,
You can tell me later.
no, well, I think there's a general answer. So it was a good question, and just for the folks at home to repeat, in case you didn't hear it, it was that what can an individual member of the public do to make sure that teeth are put into ordinances or things for the policies for the future. And then absolutely, in terms of what Dick said, you need to show up. Dick's been doing this for over 40 years, almost 50. I've been doing this for over 20. There's an old saying, like, if you're not at the table, you're what's for dinner, in terms of public policy. And in some ways, it's not very equitable. And we recognize that, but that's the system that we've got. But in terms of pertinent to discussion tonight is, number one, go back and vote for the things that you feel, the preservation techniques that need to be used now. And we're asking very specific questions in the back. Two is that continue to look at the master plan, because the master plan is your guiding document, and that's your defense for everything. And that guides not only you, the public, but elected and appointed officials and future elected and appointed officials. Third is then ordinances, as the gentleman in the back said, that's where the rubber hits the road. And that is, and if you've ever dealt with public policy, it's a long, long path, and it's very frustrating. And there's lots of times where you turn around and you feel like you're on this silly, silly roller coaster. But in the end, if it's the vision of the community and the community will put money behind it and their time and effort, it'll get done. So keep the hope, keep the effort, and also have a functional democracy where you look at what your elected and appointed officials are doing, and they listen to you, and you communicate in a functional way back and forth, because that's when you get things done. Okay, sir, you're the last one, because we got to give them back.
I just wanted to know, where does this go from here? Is there a report that's issued, or does the planning commission just take what they heard and put it into the master plan?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, this is an ongoing process, as you know. I know you've been involved in several of these. You know, the process, I mean, we are still in the state of fact-finding with the Planning Commission. This is just one of several workshops we've already conducted, and focus groups and discussions with, you know, groups like the Chamber that we are scheduling. So ultimately, this will all come back to the Planning Commission, and meetings will be, you know, there'll be additional advertised workshops to report out results. So, and, you know, again, I want to encourage you to keep track of what you see on the township's website. Brian has set up some excellent information on that website that you can get more, you can get fairly current information about what's going on with the master plan. So I think we have to get the planning commission back up to the dais, right? And again, thank our panel members. Thank you again.
Coaster bumps. He left though. He did? Yeah, he came at 6:20 and he left at like 7 o'clock. So I don't know if that counts for being here or not, or what.
I think we can do this pretty expeditiously here.
Is that your way of telling me to hurry up, Dick?
Well, I think so.
Let the record show Planning Commissioner Lochran showed up at 6:21 and departed at 7 o'clock. So I don't know if that accounts as participation or not. Next item is item H, approval of minutes. H1 is the regular meeting minutes, December 8th, 2022. I move we approve the minutes as printed. Does anyone want to second my motion, or does anyone suggest any revisions to the minutes?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Abstentions? Nays? Minutes are approved, 6-0. Item I is the next item, the consultants report.
None.
Item J, discussion. At the last planning commission meeting, we talked about changing the start time for planning commission meetings from 6:30 PM to 6 PM. There was one planning commission, no member had an issue with starting at 6 o'clock except one member, Dave Boersma. He is no longer serving on the planning commission, so now, unless our new member, Mr. Mazza, has any issues, do you have an issue starting at 6 o'clock?
No.
So I make a motion that in the future, planning commission meetings begin at 6 PM to be consistent with the start time of the township board. That's my motion.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing no one, all in favor of a 6 PM start time for the planning commission moving forward, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing no one, we approve that motion 6-0. I want to echo what Mr. Carlisle said. I want to thank Sue, Sam, Kristen, and Jerry for their participation. I want to thank all the residents who attended this evening. Your input is important. Remind you, as Megan and Dick indicated, we're working on a master plan. In the near future, we're a few months away, there's going to be a draft document that by law is got a 63-day public review period. Read it. Share your comments. Participate. Show up at public hearings. Elect people who think like you. Volunteer for boards. Volunteer for the Planning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, Parks and Recreation Board. Get involved. It's your township. If you want to protect it, get involved. Any other discussion?
Mr. Steven?
Yes.
Can I make a comment about what we were talking about earlier?
Yes.
As a commission member, I was just, in 2008, I was part of a ragtag group that did put a ballot proposal on, and that was, we had like 20 members, about $10,000, and that was the absolute worst year to bring a ballot initiative. In 2008, things were just collapsing. But we only lost 57 to 43% in this township, so, you know, I thought in the worst time, we were almost there, you know, so. Just
This is an opportunity for the township to be a leader in some of the things we talked about this evening. So, you know, it's ultimately has to be approved by the township board. The master plan has to be approved by the township board. So you're at the ground level tonight. Continue to be involved. Everything's on the website. You know, this is your opportunity. You gotta grasp it. Any other discussion? I motion adjournment. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We're adjourned.